Just talking for a moment about Zaxcom, we make wireless equipment and recorders and mixing surfaces that are very different than what exists in the industry. Unofficially, the system is referred to as the ecosystem, which is not a name we gave it. And if you have a Zaxcom recorder, if you have Zaxcom wireless, if you have Zaxcom IFB, that all works together. And we'll go into the how each part of it works together as we go along here. But I just wanted to kind of introduce the concept that, when you get a wireless transmitter, again, a recorder, which currently our recorder is called the Nova 2. We have something called the Diva 24, which is a 24-track recorder. So, when you get it all, everything talks to everything else. And the important thing that we're going to bring out this morning is how people work with this to enhance what they do, okay, in recording sound for television and motion picture. So having said that, I present Mr. Michael Clark.
My foray into Zaxcom came on the heels of the FCC narrowing down our bandwidth. The beauty of Zaxcom that attracted me to them is the digital ability to cram wireless into small spaces. Analog, obviously, we have to deal with intermodulation and things of that nature, and have all of our transmitter and receivers across many blocks that we no longer have access to. Being able to squish everything into one, I run at this time 18 wireless across booms, talent, and private line with my boom and utilities. And I have that all in probably a 15 megahertz window, which is half of what Zaxcom has. A 35 megahertz window that they filter out everything outside of that. So I'm in a very small sliver, and it's pretty much the only available sliver in Atlanta at this moment. And I have space for even more. If I need to add any more, I can squeeze more in there. But it was the advent of the MRX 414 receiver that Glenn came out with that really pushed me towards Zaxcom wireless, because I was able to have a bag rig that matched my cart rig. So if I needed to go into a mobile situation, I didn't have to swap transmitters and microphones from one manufacturer to another, because I was able to have, at that point, 10 at the time when you had that, because the RX-8 was not available yet. Now I have 16 channels in a bag the size of this, and 18 channels on my cart. Having that functionality to be able to go from a cart rig to a bag rig was what sold me on switching ultimately all the way over to Zaxcom wireless. My cart layout is an RX-12R, which, like I said, is one rack unit, 1.25 rack units. It has 18 wireless in it that feeds AES into my Diva 24. I stay digital all the way from the transmitter all the way to the recording tracks. And then I use URX 100s and 50s, which feed directors, script supervisors, and my crew. Pretty much stay completely into the Zaxcom world. There's not a single piece of gear except for a little mixer. CL4 feeds my URXs, so I'm completely 100% into the full ecosystem. What I love about that is that the transmitters have full Zaxnet control that I control at my Mix 16, which is a control surface that controls all the wireless that feeds into my Diva 24. I use the channel faders up top as my gain control for all my transmitters. So I have full control of the levels of the transmitters and the microphone, and my ISO tracks match the recordings that are on each individual transmitter. So if I ever have to pull a card from a transmitter, it matches equally in gain and sound for post-production, which is still a very rare instance that I ever have to pull that off of that. but I also have an organizational workflow that allows post to access any transmitter audio they ever need down in post-production.
How are you giving post access to your transmitter tracks?
I offload every transmitter to a hard drive
Every day?
as it fills up.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So it's about 1 to 2 cards every 2 weeks. So boom 1 is always the first one to go. Transmitter 1 would be second, sometimes boom 2. Right now we're on week 8 of a show. I'm 2 cards in.
And what was the impetus for you to go to that extra level of deliverables versus your ISO tracks that are on the recorder?
When we were doing Stranger Things, 11 months of shooting, and as a mixer, we want to give them the boom track. We try to give them the boom as much as possible. And you have 7 or 8 wireless out there. I'm not monitoring 7 or 8 wireless 100% of the time to hear that single dropout that happens. And ideally, we hope that post continues the mix with the booms and how we envision it on set to be done. But if they go into post-production and they decide, I'm gonna use the wires for this entire scene, but shit, there's a hit on here, we're gonna have to loop that. I wanted them to have access to being able to grab that ISO track, not the ISO track, but the transmitter audio to save that one little hit if it happened.
And save them the trouble of bothering you for it?
Yeah.
So you just put it out there as a matter of your workflow?
Yeah, I emailed post immediately. I was talking to the dialogue editors pretty much from the get-go and said, hey, this is coming down the line. I'm just gonna let you know that if you do hear a hit, don't worry about it. I got you covered. And of course there were questions. What do you mean? How do you have this saved? Because they never heard of Zaxcom before, or they never even heard of the workflow. So I developed it for that show specifically because that was the first show I did where I was 100% Zaxcom. You get into a new wireless system, you're a little edgy on the range and whatnot, but ultimately they had told me they ended up using maybe 3 or 4 times ever needing to go into those transmitters. So I thought that was a huge success over 11 months of work. And there's moments where I did hear it, and I would yank it off the card, pop it in, transfer that one file, and send it in with the daily.
Right.
But I would also, I'd then make that note, because you have to make that note for dailies, and then they would at least have it so that they could fix the dailies mix.
It's amazing how much we've had to get into being dailies editors.
Yeah.
Michael, what size cards do you use in your transmitters?
32 gigs, but that's overkill. It is. I mean, I initially went 32 gigs because I was hoping to not have to transfer at all, if not at all, but really long stretches of time. But then I realized there was a file count limitation of 500, and I was kind of, damn, it sucks. So
this may be a question for Glenn more so than anybody else, but some of the competition that have transmitters that also record have size limits on cards that can be used in their transmitters. Do you have similar limits, or are we able to put, say, a 64 or a 128 in one of your transmitters without any trouble?
I think we might, it's either 16 or 32 gigs that we basically will stop even dealing with.
Yeah.
The bigger the card, it takes more time to format it. It's just not necessary. I mean,
32 gigs of single channel dialogue is.
I mean, literally, yeah, literally you could record straight for multiple weeks on that card and not have to do anything about it. No. The interesting thing about our recording is that the data that's filling the card is not, it's not an uncompressed file. It's
MARF or?
It is MARF, yes, but MARF is multiple things. But literally, we have to compress and expand the data when we transmit it. It's a lossless compression. I mean, totally lossless. And but this saves us a lot of room on the cards and also saves us a lot of processing in the transmitters. So when you take the card and use Zaxconvert to bring it back to a linear file, you're going to get a much bigger file than what is on the card.
One thing I can say with the ZMT4 transmitter, if you're using like a 16 gig card, it will show you how many hours are left on the card, but it only will show you that it'll say 99 hours, but it's actually a lot more. It's just
That's as big as the digits go.
as big as the digits go, but like I say, 16 gig card probably gets you, a couple weeks. So when but once it hits that, goes below 99 hours, then you'll get an accurate count. But I know it's about 2 weeks on 16 gigs.
Yeah.
And these guys have a different workflow because they don't, they do have it, but I have a stop-start set up in my workflow to where when I hit record, all the transmitters drop into record. When I stop, they all stop. So I have individual files for individual takes. So I can go in and just grab the one take and move on. And
Yeah,
on the
and the data moves over to each transmitter as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each transmitter in the bottom right corner of the screen has the file count as well. So my utility every week every day looks at that file count when he boots it up, and if it's getting close to 500, we swap cards. So it's easier in my notes that end up going to post that they know which card that file is now being transferred to. So if you did full on record all day, all long, a 32 gig card lasts probably 3 weeks. I've got my CL4 in continuous record as a backup, as well as my private line gets thrown to it, and it's a stereo, and that goes like 3 weeks.
Yeah, CL4 is what we call the camera link transmitter, and it can provide a backup for you because it has basically a 2-channel recording capability. I just wanted to.
Yeah, and it gets the time code stamped and everything. And I have to reformat that every 3 weeks or so.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
And the CL4, the other thing it is your IFB transmitter and also Zaxnet transmit for our workflow.
Yeah.
But if you do a stop-start, 32 gigs is actually way more than you need. I think when I transfer cards over, I think I get up to 16 gigs is the highest I've seen, and that's the uncompressed version. So I recognized the compression that was going on when I transferred over my CL4, and a 32 gigabyte card ended up being 130 gigs of total information.
When it opened up.
The uncompressed version went from 32 to 130